Hey folks, David Stewart here. I want to talk today about some conversations I've had in the comments on YouTube about skepticism versus cynicism and what these two things are, because I've expressed some negativity towards cynicism. So I've had some people ask, how do I avoid being a cynic but still be skeptical about things? And so I wanted to talk about these two approaches and what they really mean, as well as something that I tend to call Nuevo Skepticism, and I'll talk about that towards the end. So cynicism versus skepticism, what's the difference between the two? Well, even if you go all the way back to antiquity, the Cynics, as a branch of Greek philosophy, tended to be really radical, whereas skeptics classically tend to be very orthodox. So they're coming from different perspectives. The Cynics viewed the purpose of life as to be more virtuous, and that our societies and our social mores inhibited virtue, and you should live closer to nature. So they were very radical, and their cynicism towards the established system, that's what we tend to carry forward to more modern meanings of cynicism, viewing the system as inherently valueless, viewing people's motivations as inherently evil or untrustworthy. You might consider cynicism a black pill philosophy, right? So the black pill would be it's all bad and it's all garbage. So that's being a cynic. Whereas a skeptic, what skepticism really is, and this is true classically, is you don't replace what has already been established unless you have a significant amount of reason to do so, or evidence that you have a superior model. So it comes from an orthodox perspective. I guess you could say it's more conservative, but I think orthodoxy is probably better because that encompasses dogma and all the things that have been tried and tested throughout time. Classically through the Middle Ages, skeptics tended to be skeptical of science, not skeptical in the way that a lot of modern, quote, skeptic channels are, which a lot of them don't like that label anyway, which is to view science as the orthodoxy rather than some orthodoxy that science is trying to revise. And so you don't change what you're doing unless it's replaced by something better than something that you know is better. So you don't throw out what works unless there's a significant amount of evidence. And if you distill it even closer to the modern idea of a skeptic, it's you just don't believe things without a lot of evidence for them. And you have certain standards of evidence that you want applied before you will believe certain statements or certain ideas. So they really are coming from different perspectives. You could think of the cynic as being the unconstrained vision. It's radical. Whereas the skeptic is the constrained vision. It's more conservative. It's more focused on what works, and it's focused on piecemeal change, one thing at a time, rather than throwing out the whole system and wanting something different. That's really cynicism. And those are the two different viewpoints. And sometimes they can arrive at similar conclusions or even at the same place through these different means, but they really are a different set of approaches. So you're not going to end up being cynical by being skeptical. You don't get so skeptical that you become cynical unless you're going to fall into this thing that I call Nuevo Skepticism, which I'll talk about in a minute. A great example of how these things can kind of end up in the same place is vaccines. So a skeptic might look at a combination vaccine, like the MMR vaccine, and say, well, traditionally we've done these as 3 different vaccines, and they've been effective in that way, and they've been safe in that way. I'm not going to abandon the 3 vaccine schedule to go to 1 vaccine unless it's been proven safer than 3 vaccines, because there's really no, if there's an increased risk for 3 vaccines, well, there's really no reason to do that, right? Any kind of increased risk is a downside without any more upside. It's not like the vaccines are more effective if you give all three of them at the same time. In fact, they are supposed to be the same amount of effectiveness. So a skeptic would look at the MMR vaccine and be like, I don't see any reason to use 1 vaccine instead of 3. Whereas a cynic would probably not engage with that kind of argument at all. What they would say is, vaccines, the reason they want to get everybody to get vaccinated is because they want to get everybody to pay the drug company money. It's all about extracting money from people, and they don't really interact with the idea of whether the vaccines work or not, or to what degree, or what the risks and rewards, what the harms and benefits are. So a skeptical approach would be looking at harms benefits. So if you see skeptical approaches in medicine, they tend to be more what are the harms, what are the benefits? Whereas these aren't necessarily cynical, but more radical approaches don't look at that. They just look at what's the benefit, or here's this new idea, and I'm going to try to promote this radical idea. It's not really cynicism at that point, but cynicism would look at the entire medical establishment as being bad, right? Because they've been wrong about things. So the medical establishment's been wrong about lots of things. Well, so is every sort of system ever. That doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's the skeptical approach. Now, Nuevo Skepticism comes into play a little bit different. This is what I call, this is my own conjured up term. I've talked about it with various people on different podcasts and different shows, but I'll talk about it a little bit now. Nuevo Skepticism is really applying cynicism or being cynical about the systems that exist. It's a general cynical approach, but they're applying skeptical methods to things that are already established dogmas. So it's kind of a weird inversion. So from Nuevo Skeptics, you get the people who believe that, like, what some people call conspiracy theorists, like people who believe that the Earth is flat, right? And this is something I've learned from them, is they ask for evidence that the Earth is round, and you can provide thousands and thousands of years of people who knew it was round, and the way that they discovered it was round, the way that they calculated it. You could go to the ocean and watch the ships go over the sea, but they're very skeptical of all of that evidence. They're like, that's not enough evidence that the Earth is round. They end up kind of entrenched in this belief. So they arrive at this place where they're trying to use skeptical approaches, but they're really coming from a place of cynicism. So it's a weird kind of hybrid of the two. So how do you avoid Nuevo Skepticism? Where does Nuevo Skepticism come from is probably what I should answer first. And I think it comes from the cynical side, and it's easy to be cynical about things. In fact, I'm cynical about things. I'm rather cynical about the education system because I look at its consequences. I look at its results, and I don't see things that are of a great amount of value. So I'm pretty cynical about the education system. But if you have a standard person that goes through, and of course I'm talking about the American education system, your mileage may vary if you're outside the United States, and feel free to give me your thoughts about this particular idea below and how you experience these in your own homeland's education system, particularly if you grew up in the Eastern Bloc. I think that would be, there's so many interesting discussions about what was on the other side of the Iron Curtain back before the 90s. Anyway, so you are told a bunch of things in your science classes, in your literature classes, in your history classes. Then you grow up, you begin interacting with the internet, and you figure out a whole bunch of it is not the whole truth at the very least, and a lot of it is false. So a lot of things with history, you end up learning, like, everything that you're told with history is not really true, or it's incomplete. Particularly in America, we have an approach to teaching history where you have this approved text that's approved by the state, and usually whatever Texas or California is approving, the other states just kind of get in line, because those are the two biggest states, or New York, the three biggest states, New York, Texas, and California by population. They kind of get in line with those. And whatever is that text decides on, it's kind of done through politics, like what is going to be included in it. So here in California, where I live, for decades now, every fourth grader learns California history. And you learn select things about California history. And you learn things that basically aren't true, or there's a whole bunch missing from it that's really important. And in a lot of cases, you don't end up learning things which are true. So a lot of people come out of school with a very bad idea of how history was. And then this also includes literature, right? Like they're forced to read literature that they don't like. Or you have like the food pyramid. The food pyramid's a great example, right? So if you were a millennial or you were a Gen Xer, and I'm kind of between those two, you grew up with this thing called the food pyramid they taught in like elementary school science classes, which is how you're supposed to eat food. So at the bottom was grains, 7 to 11 servings of grains. And then you had milk and like meat and vegetables. And like at the top, it's like fat, right? Fats. Basically based on the Lipid Hypothesis, which people should have been skeptical of back when that was coming out. But you have this thing called the food pyramid, and now I would just call it the diabetes pyramid. So you grow up and you learn that the food pyramid is garbage and will make you fat, because who eats 11 servings of bread a day? Like each piece of bread, if you just say it's 100 calories and you're eating 11, that's 1,100 calories of like carbohydrates. So it's just like sugar at the bottom, right? And then maybe some vegetables, maybe a little bit of meat, just a little bit of meat, and of course dairy. You know, you gotta have more dairy than meat. And it was made by the USDA, which is an agricultural, it's a government agricultural administration, right? So they're there for promoting agriculture. So they include everything that agriculture makes: dairy, grains, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then of course it became whole grains, like that. Those are, your body reacts so differently to whole grains than it does to non-whole grains, like grains that include the fiber, or grains that have the fiber extracted. It's still, you know, carbohydrates. Anyway, so you have this, and so when you grow up and you learn that that's garbage, then you're gonna be cynical about it, and you're gonna view everything that you're told is garbage, which makes you start questioning everything and replacing the orthodoxy that you were taught with other things, which maybe make more sense to you. And so then you end up in kind of a Nuevo Skeptic position where you have you've created a different orthodoxy that's just like a cynical inversion of what is standard orthodoxy. And it's really easy to see how you get there. And like food pyramid's a great example. Lipid hypothesis is a great example. Lipid hypothesis, people were skeptical of it. That's this idea that fat is bad for you. And people ended up with diabetes and heart disease because they ate no fats and ate a bunch of carbs, which, you know, had negative effects on their cardiovascular system, caused inflammation and things like that. Nowadays, we view the lipid hypothesis as the BS that it was, but it's only recently in schools that I've seen teachers teaching nutrition that wasn't the food pyramid, and what they go back to is not some new thing. It's just, what was the nutrition that people ate in like the 40s? And it's like, yeah, you eat some protein and you eat lots of vegetables, and you know, you can have these things in it, and you just don't think about this weird pyramid of 11 servings of grains or something like that. But it's easy to look at that, and it should have been skeptical. People should have been a lot more skeptical of people coming out and saying that lipids were bad for you. And it takes decades of people suffering negative health consequences to realize you should have stuck with the orthodoxy approach, which is just don't be fat, right? If you're overweight, lose weight. You know, if your body fat's too high, reduce your body fat. And that's a much simpler and more time-tested approach to somebody's health and diet than just don't eat this, don't eat that. And so that's to me, I really like thinking about that one, because the media kind of speeds up the reactions against skepticism. So you kind of jump on the newest fad and you promote it because it gets people's attention, and then it becomes its own orthodoxy. And it takes a while of skepticism from before to kind of throw those things out and view them as they should be. Other things, you know, if I were to think of a modern thing you probably ought to be skeptical toward, it would be like statin drugs for reducing cholesterol. And there's a whole lot of people that are now being very skeptical against the prescription of statin drugs. And that's one that I think in the next few years, you'll have a reevaluation of the proper way to have statin drugs as part of a course of general prevention. In other words, you probably have no statin drugs for prevention of people who aren't already very ill and need some sort of drug intervention. So anyway, I wanted to take some time and explain those two different sides and those two different approaches as I see them. And please leave me your feedback about them and what you think about skepticism versus cynicism. I'm not, you know, it's easy to be cynical about certain things, but they're not. Cynicism, the main point I want to make is cynicism is not an extreme version of skepticism. Cynicism is really coming from a completely different perspective. It's unconstrained versus constrained. It's radical versus orthodox, and that's kind of how I view it. So, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Subscribestar is working again. I'm no longer on Patreon. I'm at subscribestar.com/DavidVStewart. So if you want to be my subscriber, I very much appreciate it. I will be publishing some short fiction through Subscribestar for free. So if you're a subscriber, you'll get that for free. I don't have a way to integrate that with my book library, but if you're a $5 sub, or you know, if you want to give me money through Subscribestar and avoid a retail outlet and get a book of your choice, you can do that as well. So I'll see you guys next time. And they are processing payments and all that kind of stuff. So it's back online. It's great alternative to Patreon. And anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Have a great day.